The Adventures of Superman When He Was a Boy. For decades, Clark Kent's history as Superboy, both in Smallville and the future with the Legion of Superheroes, was a cornerstone of the Superman mythology. Despite being erased from comics continuity twice, the concept of Clark as Superboy has endured in various ways across time and media. It also represents the largest unexplored piece of my Superman fandom. Until now. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superboy fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Later this episode, our Boy of Steel coverage continues with a discussion of the Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes comic book run from the Bronze Age. Previously, we considered the character in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and now we are making our way into the 1970s, and that period of time when Superboy shared his title and the spotlight with the team from the 30th century. I have to say, I really found that I enjoyed the Silver Age stories that we read and talked about in a previous episode. And I won't lie, I struggled a bit with these Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes issues because Superboy was one of an ensemble. He was part of the team. And I felt like I kind of lost that thread of following Clark as Superboy specifically. There were certain stories or aspects of stories that I felt kind of recaptured that for me a little bit, and those are the ones that I definitely gravitated to the most. But I do recognize that Superboy operating as that team member, as that part of an ensemble, is a draw for a lot of fans, and that era, that run in particular, is beloved by many. So I think you'll enjoy this conversation because my guest for that part of the episode is Chris Jacobson from the Superboy Beyond YouTube channel. And he has so much love and passion and insight for Clark as Superboy generally, and specifically for this era of comics when Superboy was operating primarily with the Legion of Superheroes, and we moved away from those more Smallville set stories. So we had a great back and forth. I asked him a lot of questions, and whether you are new or newer to that run of comics, or you grew up reading them, or you came to them later and you have a lot of knowledge and appreciation regarding them, I think you'll enjoy the conversation. So that's coming up in just a little bit. And to tee us up, we have a question from one of our patrons, shout out to Rick, who says, curious as to your experience with the Legion. Mine is very scarce. I read the Wade reboot and I loved John's inclusion in his Superman run. I did not like the Bendis reboot. I have to say my experience with the Legion of Superheroes is relatively limited. The version of the Legion I met as a kid was the post-Zero Hour reboot, and I met them a couple of years after that in the Final Night crossover event when the team was stranded in the present day, and we had an echo of that Silver Age story, The Death of Ferro Lad, which we talked about a couple of episodes ago. So that was my first experience with them, and I really only ever encountered them when they were in a Superman story. I never actively sought out any of the Legion titles or Legion-centric stories until that Wade reboot that Rick mentioned, and I stuck with that for a while. In the end, it didn't resonate with me enough to read it all the way through. It was by Mark Waid and Barry Kitson, and as the audience knows, big Mark Waid fan. I appreciate Barry Kitson's art as well, but it's subjective, and I found that that's where I hit a little bit of a roadblock, I think. But I like the concept, and I thought it was definitely an accessible take on the characters. I certainly didn't feel lost. And then other than that, also something that Rick mentioned, I did experience the Legion when Jeff Johns reintroduced Clark's past as Superboy and Clark's experience with the Legion of Superheroes, specifically that Legion trilogy that Johns did. The Justice League, Justice Society crossover, the Lightning Saga, the Superman and the Legion of Superheroes arc from Action Comics, and Final Crisis, Legion of Three Worlds. And we have coverage on that Legion trilogy coming up. What I will say is that at the time, it didn't really have the impact on me because Clark as Superboy was such a gap in my fandom. Even though overall I enjoyed those stories, they didn't have that impact on me that I anticipate they will now after all this work we've been doing covering Clark as Superboy. So I am actually really excited to get back into those stories again. But overall, that's my admittedly a limited experience with the Legion of Superheroes. But I want to give a quick reminder that our pal, comic book artist V. Ken Marion, is running his Kickstarter campaign for his creator-owned comic book project, Battle Chronicle Soul Striker. I mentioned it in a previous episode. I just wanted to remind everyone, if you can take a minute, check out the project, support it if you can. It's greatly appreciated. And again, all the best to Ken. I'm a proud backer. I can't wait to see the finished product. Also, you might have noticed if you've looked down at your podcast player or if you've been following along on social media, we have brand new key art for Digging for Kryptonite. I could not be happier with how it came out. And I love that this is now the visual representation of our show online, on social media, and on all of the podcast platforms. Our previous art was by cartoonist Greg Schiegel. It served us so well for almost 4 years and 150 episodes. But after all that time, I thought it would be fun to go in a different direction. So I commissioned a piece by artist Isaiah Simmons, and there is a link to his work in the show notes. I hope you'll check it out. He knocked it out of the park. If you're interested in getting a commission, he has information on his pages. I hope you will take advantage of it. Wonderful artist. And I couldn't be happier with the finished piece here. So if you haven't looked, take a look. And I'm really happy to have this as our new key art. Okay, so Superboy talk is coming up, but first, I wanted to reserve some space here on Digging for Kryptonite to discuss something that I know the entire Superman fan community has been buzzing about, and I'm referring, of course, to the photo that James Gunn posted of his star, David Corenswet, in costume as Superman from the upcoming 2025 film. The dust has settled a little bit and now felt like the right time to have this conversation, and here it is. Joining me to discuss the recent reveal of David Corenswet in costume as Superman from James Gunn's forthcoming 2025 Superman movie is returning guest Nick Farina. Nick, welcome back.
Anthony, it's great to be back. And oh boy, let's get into it.
Before we get into the specifics of this photo that I imagine virtually everyone listening to this has already seen, before we get into the specifics, let's just get to the heart of the matter. May 6th, this drops. Gunn posts it online on social media. What is your initial gut reaction? And in the 2 weeks since, how, if at all, has that reaction shifted?
My gut reaction was, if I'm being totally honest, surprise. Surprise because it went in a different direction than I thought he was going to go. And when I say that, I thought, it would be a bit more stick to your ribs. He's posted how he adores All-Star Superman and Superman for All Seasons. So in my mind's eye, I was predicting something much more simple. So when the reveal came, and it ultimately was what it was, which is a mix of, you can absolutely see the New 52 influence. That surprised me. I did not think he would go like hard in the paint like New 52 with the suit. And I'll tell you, that's a New 52 suit. There's no way of getting around it.
Fair enough. And in the time since, has your position improved, worsened? How are you feeling now?
Right now, I think I've come to, again, I haven't talked to James Gunn. I don't know why he made the choices that he ultimately made. I can only guess. But, in my opinion, I feel like I've gotten down to the why behind a lot of the decisions that he made. First and foremost, I don't want to bury the lead. Trunks, red trunks are back. And personally, I was hoping for the trunks. And the reason for that is, what Zack Snyder did well, I feel like, with Henry Cavill's Man of Steel, and ultimately what would become the more advanced Batman v Superman and Justice League suits. I thought he did a great job making it look alien, kind of like sticking to the theme, like, the real world's reaction to a god. And what would he wear? I felt like they did such a good job with that if this did something similar, as far as making the suit look alien, it could only be good, I feel like, in comparison. And I really wanted James Gunn to go the other way. And for me, that meant trunks. It meant a more, again, stick to your ribs, traditional Superman look, which again is why I was so surprised to see the New 52 elements there. It's basically the New 52 costume with the trunks and the Kingdom Come. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
No, I completely understand. So talking a little bit more about the specifics of this, I know, again, I'm sure everyone has seen it. Everyone has pored over it and studied it. I spent more time staring at this guy's crotch than I ever anticipated. And clearly we were presented with a position where it's not entirely clear at first glance whether the trunks are there or not. I agree with you. I think you take a close look and it seems pretty clear that the trunks are there. And I think that's definitely one of the biggest takeaways from this photo. And when we're talking about this, it's Superman sitting down in this apartment with this pink/purple ball of energy skyrocketing behind him outside. And he's putting on his boot while he's in his costume and he's looking down. And in terms of the costume itself, piggybacking right off of what you were saying, that collar, that New 52-esque high collar around the neck, immediately jumped out at me. We had obviously already seen the symbol, that Kingdom Come-esque symbol, although with a twist because we have the yellow background there. So it's not full on Kingdom Come, but definitely in that mode.
Sure.
We seemingly have the yellow belt and red trunks. So a nod to the classic iteration of the costume. We have a lot of lines on the costume, which seems to give it more of a practical, tactical sort of feel. And in terms of the color, overall, it feels a little bit darker than I thought this would go. Yet, as I know people have pointed out, and I can't really dispute this, it does appear that the top half looks darker as a result of a battle, perhaps, because when you look at the legs, they do seem not vastly lighter, but at least a little bit. So I won't go so far as to say, oh, it's such a dark costume, but overall, the hue is a bit darker than I was originally anticipating.
I think we really need to see him standing up. Because as you just pointed out, noticeably the color on the pants, the tights, it's significantly more of a vibrant blue. And again, that could be because of like the dirty battle damage look that they, for whatever reason, and that may play into a plot point. We don't know. Why is he dirty? Why is he battle damaged in this moment? This could be a scene right out of the movie where whatever's in the background is very much on his radar, and it's a kind of a once more into the fray moment.
Right, right. And so that's the thing. I think as we drill down on this more specifically, in my mind at least, there's the actual costume piece of it, but then there's the pose and the setting and just the overall vibe that this conjures. And for me, probably more than anything else, I was surprised. I was a bit surprised. More than I was excited or disappointed. I was just kind of surprised that this was the choice. I've been trying to figure out how best to articulate this, how I'm feeling about the costume at the moment. And as always, Nick, Smallville provides the answer. Because in the series finale of Smallville, Clark and Lex have their first meeting in years. They're face to face for the first time in a really long time. And Clark says, "Lex." And Lex says, "You still say it the same way after all these years. Astonishment mixed with a hint of dread, yet with a hopeful finish." And if I had to capture how I feel about, about this costume, astonishment mixed with a hint of dread, yet with a hopeful finish. And I think that's kind of where I am. But we were talking about this, I think a little bit on and off mic. The reactions to the costume, to the photo, I think are almost as interesting, if not more interesting, than the photo itself. And I don't want to paint with a broad brush or generalize. However, I do feel, and I want to get your take, and you're very plugged in, especially in the Twitter/X space. You've got a great following, and I always enjoy your posts, and you get a lot of engagement and a lot of traction. And I'm very curious to kind of pick your brain about like what you've been hearing. But I would say, this is just kind of my assessment, and then I want to toss it to you. But I feel like there are a few different camps here. I think there are those who were predisposed to not like this, perhaps due to an allegiance to the previous iteration of the character. And there might be some people listening to this who think or assume I'm in that category, given the fact that I've defended the Snyder movies a lot on this podcast, especially in our recent event. And I'm not in that camp. I've said this before and I'll say it again. I want nothing more than for this movie to knock it out of the park. We all win in that respect. And even if I don't love how we got here, we're here. So we need the best possible movie. So I'm not in that camp, but I do think there are folks who probably went into this not really looking to like it.
Yeah. Oh, certainly. I think there were people who had their minds made up before they signed on X that day and got the notification. And it's a very sad thing. So that they could point their fingers like when they see it and go, see. But absolutely, that was a good number of people that I felt like, had already made up their minds before they looked at the image. Me, I think it's very easy. I remember when I first saw the Robert Pattinson Batman costume, I was mortified. He looked like an alien with two little antennas for the ears, like they were so thin. But then when you see it in the context of the movie, and while it's certainly not my favorite Batman movie, the costume made sense in the context of that movie, and has earned my respect. And that's Batman, who is second to Superman for me. This I think a lot of people will be changing their tunes once we see a live action teaser of this suit. Because there's no way they're not going to make Superman look awesome in those first glimpses that we see him. So I think it's going to be brighter. I think the blue of the pants is indicative of what the blue on the entire outfit is going to look like when he's properly lit. In other words, a nice, bright, vibrant blue.
No, I think you're right. And that's the other big piece of this, where it's funny. We did a wish list episode about this movie earlier in 2024, and a lot has happened since then. We've had a bunch more casting announcements. The title of the movie changed from Superman Legacy to merely Superman, and we're commonly referring to it as Superman 2025 or Superman 25. And then, of course, and I think this is the biggest piece, is this costume reveal. So we're working with what we have at the moment, but I know we're all excited, and that's why I wanted to kind of carve out some time here to talk about it on this show. As much as I went on Always Hold On to Smallville, like the day it happened, and did an episode there. But now that the dust has settled a little bit, I wanted to take some time here and talk about it. But with the huge caveat of, we have to see what this looks like in action. We can only get so far based on a still photo. However, going back to what I was saying before, different camps, different categories of fan reaction. I do feel like the flip of what I said a moment ago, I do think there are those folks who maybe didn't have the warmest feelings towards the previous iteration of Superman on screen, and perhaps are predisposed to shower this with love and affection. And
certainly,
for anyone who just genuinely loves this image, whether you're in that category I just described, or hell, maybe you don't have a horse in this race, but you're just excited to see a new version of Superman. Like, I totally get that. And if that's your deal, I don't want to yuck anyone's yum. If you like this, I don't want to take away from that. However, just taking a step back and looking at this objectively and critically, I honestly don't know, and I swear this is not any type of Snyder bias or anything like that. I don't know that this was the most effective choice. Particulars of the costume aside, just this vibe that we're presented with. And here's the thing, and I'll lay this out, and then I'm going to toss the ball to you. Given the criticisms of the Snyder movies, that they're too dark, he's too brooding, he's too angsty, right? By the way, I don't share in those criticisms, but I heard them a lot. And it's just kind of surprising to me if there was this huge contingent of criticism towards those films in that vein, I would imagine you would want to come out of the gate like guns blazing no pun intended, in the complete opposite direction. Gunn has shared that image of Superman in the clouds from All-Star Superman a lot. If it had been something in that vein or something more from All-Star or For All Seasons, I would be like, okay, like I get the vibe that we're going for, and clearly they're trying to present something different. This doesn't feel that different than what came before, and it just surprises me.
They're trying to make the Superman costume look cool. It's a different sort of cool than the Henry Cavill one, but Superman doesn't need to look cool and have he needs to look like Superman. And it could be argued that that's an overly simplistic way of thinking. You know, I'm not saying stick him in the reef suit and call it a day. Certainly there needs to be some, fabric updates to make it look modern. But what they did here, the first thing that jumped out at me costume wise were the boots. And man, those are some clunky stylistic boots. And then you see the rest of the costume where you see all the lines and it's undeniably New 52. Well, what were they trying to do with the New 52 costume in 2011? They were trying to make Superman look super cool, in a post-Dark Knight world. And, sure, he has trunks, which opt for the more classic feel, but I almost feel like the trunks are like a fail-safe, where like they went for an overly modern New 52 design, but he has the trunks. So, you can say, well, it's the classic costume when it simply isn't the classic costume. You could say a lot about this suit and you can draw parallels, but it's not a classic Superman look, despite the trunks.
This is one of the things I have been wrestling with. Zach and I talked about it when I was on his show. I really haven't come to any more of a conclusion, but I still think the question is interesting, is that this costume is an amalgam of different versions. It has elements of the New 52, elements of Kingdom Come, elements of the classic version. And I remain mixed on whether or not that's the right approach. Because there's a part of me that says, hey, like that's kind of cool that
it feels kind of committee-ish, just with the.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We could go in that direction, but if it's a cool idea, I think about, well, look, as controversial as the New 52 was at the time, there's a whole contingent, a whole generation perhaps of fans who got into Superman at that time. They have a lot of love and affection for that. They see that collar, that conjures something positive to them. For me, I don't get as much mileage out of it. I'm not offended by it.
They're out there. Yeah. They're out there.
So part of me says, oh, it's kind of cool to pull from all these different versions. But then I think, I don't know, is that the best way to go? We end up with kind of this hodgepodge. And when I think about the on-screen costumes, particularly in the modern era, that I've liked the most, crazy enough, on the CW, the Brandon Routh Kingdom Come costume and the Tyler Hoechlin Fleischer costume. And both of those were so faithful to the source material, and they were just their own thing.
I couldn't agree more, particularly with the Kingdom Come Routh costume. That costume made me want them to give him his own Kingdom Come spinoff of some kind. I wanted to see more of Routh in that costume. So boy, you're not kidding there.
So do you like so I guess this is my question, and I don't know if you have an answer either. I really go back and forth on this. Is there value in, hey, we're going to pull design elements from all these different iterations and we'll put it all together, versus just picking one, whether it was Kingdom Come, whether it was Fleischer, Class, like anything, we're just going to, the Rebirth costume, or hell, even if they went all in on the New 52 with the armor and the no trunk, like whatever. Do you think, what's your preference?
That's a fair question. And, when I'm looking at this, and again, there's elements that I really like, but at the same time, it feels like, the thinking was, hey, people love Kingdom Come. Okay, so let's go with that for the S, but we got to make them look modern. So let's go kind of like a New 52-esque look, but we can't go too hard in the paint modern. Let's throw the briefs on him to appease. So it's like, that's why I mentioned like done by committee. It's like, and again, this may be a harsh criticism, and at the end of the day, we need to see it in the context of the story. But it kind of feels like folks who don't know the most about Superman got together and they said, okay, what do people like about Superman? And let's make a suit wrapped around that. And that's my honest feeling towards it. But again, in the context of the film, it could make perfect sense that he's wearing that, all of the above. So
very true. I also want to say, because I don't want to neglect this, I think the actor David Cornswet looks great. I mean, as much as we can see of him in this, and again, when he's standing, when he's in action, we'll get a much better sense. But just right off the bat, first glance, I think he looks great. Again, whether the costume,
big dude,
yeah, I mean, but that's the thing. Whether the costume, this pose, and just this setting and this photo overall truly do him justice? I don't know. But from the little bit we see here, and just from behind the scenes photos and whatnot, and other promotion that he's doing for the Twisters movie, again, He's got the look. He looks great. Like, I'm excited about him and for him. One of the other things that I know people have been speculating about, so it's worth bringing up here, is an open question. Is this the only costume he will wear in the movie? Does he start in something else and it evolves into this? Or does he start with this and it evolves into something else that we've yet to see? Do you have a prediction / a hope either way?
What I could say is, wouldn't that be interesting if we kind of got like this, tour of Superman S's that we're familiar with, some we're maybe familiar with, maybe some we're not, throughout the film. In other words, if there is an evolution to the look, I think that would be very interesting, and certainly not something I'm not opposed to. Luke Bugg, who does the Geek of Steel podcast, recently said pointed out that James Gunn posted the traditional Superman, like the 1938, where it's just the red S in gold and kind of a gold shield, that James Gunn posted that recently. Now, could that, maybe be something that Martha Kent makes for him, in flashbacks, more simplified? Is there an evolution? Maybe, and it's not something I'd be sad to see.
Yeah, I know so much goes into the creation of these costumes, because part of me says I wouldn't be surprised if there's a montage in the movie where you see him through the years and you see different versions, but then those are a bunch of different costumes that they have to make. I wouldn't be shocked if he's in kind of an earlier proto costume and then it becomes this. I would be kind of surprised. I may very well be eating my words come next July, and that's totally fine. With all of this stuff, we're speculating, we're predicting, who's to say? My gut is that this is his final look in the movie. I could be totally wrong. I think if there's a different look, it's going to be an earlier proto version. Sure. Maybe something out of the Grant Morrison New 52 Action Comics, like the t-shirt and the cape or something like that. And then he gets a proper costume. Time will tell on that front. The other thing that's interesting about this, before we talk about the pose and the action that's going on here, or lack thereof, is who do we think made this suit? Because like one of the things that's so fascinating to me, I feel like there's this bifurcation here where you look at Superman on television, scanning through them, but in virtually every instance, Martha makes the suit. Versus the big screen versions, which essentially in every iteration, he is given the suit. It is bestowed upon him by his Kryptonian father, Jor-El. So there really seems to be this line of demarcation in terms of who makes the suit. Looking at something like this, to me, it does not feel as alien. It doesn't feel alien like the Snyder one did. It definitely feels more, how do I put this? It feels more handmade. I don't know if it feels homemade a la Martha made it. I don't know. Do you have a read on that?
You used the word tactical before, and that's jumping out at me. This does not look like someone that Martha Kent on with her farm sewing machine could throw together for him, and there's alien elements, that's a very odd version of if it actually means super in this universe and not hope. That's a very odd choice for an S. So I could very easily see that being his Kryptonian crest. And another thing I'll point out is I don't know how this is going to fit underneath a suit. It's very thick and heavy looking in a way that even Cavill's, seem kind of pasted on in comparison. So I don't know. Does that mean we may not get a shirt rip? We don't know.
This is a good question, because then we enter this territory of, is it going to be a la the New 52 where it kind of emerges around him? I don't get that vibe per se, but I agree with you. It seems like a stretch, no pun intended. But then here's the other thing too. It's like how specific is the movie actually going to get, right? Do we get a shirt rip and you see the S, but the actor's not literally wearing this under the clothes, and really practically speaking, that wouldn't work, but that's kind of the suspension of disbelief that we allow. Sure. Like, I don't know, but I do think that's a valid question. And to answer my own question, I don't know. It doesn't feel like Martha makes this one, but this also doesn't really feel to me like something that Jor-El gives him in the fortress. So I don't know. Again, I could be wrong about all of this.
It could be something that, a guy from Kansas puts together by himself based on what he thinks looks neat. It has kind of that look, like we talk tactical. Maybe that's what Superman's going for there, and he's putting together his uniform. We don't know.
Right now,
but again, I'm looking at this, and again, I understand we gotta suspend disbelief but I just don't see this fitting underneath a suit. But again, if they make that shirt rip scene look great in the movie, I won't be asking questions. I won't, I'd forgive it.
No, right on. Now, we have to talk about just kind of his positioning, the overall tone of this. I showed this to my 4.5-year-old son. I'm always curious, and I know it's always interesting just what they come up with, and it's such a pure, unfiltered, uninformed but unfiltered take on this. Not totally uninformed. He knows Superman. We've definitely been down that road already. But I was like, hey, what do you think? Like, what do you think? This is the new Superman. He goes, he looks sad. And I was like, yeah, he kind of does. And I also showed my wife, who has watched all of these movies. We watched them all together. Her level of investment does not rise to mine. I wouldn't expect it to. But she's
my wife also suffers from this affliction.
Yeah, I think a lot of people listening to this, their significant others, can relate. That when I show this to her, particularly just in terms of the vibe, her take on this was, it's not different enough, which circles back to what I was saying before in terms of what this is conjuring. Now, I know there's been a fair amount of criticism about a believed lack of urgency that's presented in this photo. Clearly, something is going on in the sky above Metropolis behind him. We don't know. People were speculating, is it Solaris from DC 1 Million, from the Grant Morrison story? Is it something Brainiac related, Luthor related? We don't know. But there's some danger afoot. And again, like you said, and I agree, we don't have the full context. We don't know how this is going to land. But clearly, I think it's fair to say this is meant to show there's some danger and he's suiting up to go take it on. As people have pointed out, he's looking down as he's putting this on. And we only have a still image here. We don't have the benefit of watching this on screen, and maybe this is happening at super speed. This is the look.
Maybe the boot's coming off.
Maybe yeah. I mean, I don't know. I guess what is your read on the scene? And do you feel like, the biggest picture question, do you feel like this captures the spirit of what you want this movie to be, or what they're purporting this movie to be?
It slaps me on the face. My answer is no, it doesn't. It's a dour photo. There's no way of getting around that. I think a lot of people's knee-jerk reaction was just how sullen he looks in the picture. And it could be kind of like a Spider-Man 2 moment where he's giving up the suit, maybe just based on whatever just happened with what's in the sky. And for all the flack that, Cavill's Superman got, if Henry Cavill were doing the exact same pose, I think a lot of the people who are cheerleaders for this photo would be all over it with how dour he looks again. And, see, it's not, whatever the Henry Cavill sequel would have been, it's going to be the same old darkness. So, there's no way of getting around that. This photo pose was a choice, and I'm not sure if it was a great one for out the gates, because I would describe the reaction I've seen, just taking the temperature of Twitter, to be tepid, and I don't think that's I put some posts out there about this just to gauge, excitement for this movie post reveal, and it feels tepid. I think it may have alienated some people. I think it may have scared some would-be cheerleaders away from it, and probably not the best choice of poses. Certainly not what I would have done to give this movie the juxtaposition it needs from what came before.
And that's my biggest piece of this, whether to whatever extent I like or don't like it. It's not even that. I think more than anything, I'm just kind of surprised and a little just befuddled by this very specific choice. And also when you think about the fact they've been filming for a while, you know that they have a whole battery of photos to choose from. So the fact that this, again, like this was a very deliberate choice. And I know, because I've seen some of the back and forth online as well, certainly. And I think when people bring up, oh, he doesn't look like he has enough urgency or like he cares, people are quick to say, well, again, you don't know exactly what's going on, what came before, what he's going to do. Fair. But if this is the image you are putting out there, this is all people have to go on. And it just feels like there are other choices that I think could have conjured the spirit that they have claimed they're going for. It's funny because speaking of Twitter, when this dropped, I got a little facetious, and in retrospect, it's like, why were you even bothering with this? But I said, don't they know people want to see Superman smile? And I put a wink emoji. And I think most people kind of got where I was going with that. A few people took me literally, and they were like, he doesn't smile all the time. Like, why would he be smiling in this instance? And I'm like, no. Like, I get it. I'm not saying that he should be smiling in this specific instance. It's just, given everything we've been through, again, this was just kind of an odd selection. And especially in terms of all of the sources, the source material that Gunn has claimed they're drawing inspiration from, particularly All-Star Superman and For All Seasons. There's so much imagery in both of those works, just like gorgeous, evocative, lush imagery that I think do tap into the spirit that they're talking about, that I feel like they could have drawn from something that would have represented that in a more effective way. So that's more than anything what I come back to. And then maybe one of the last things that I have to say, and then I want to, see what else is on your mind that we haven't talked about. But if I'm just going by just pure gut reaction and the experience over these couple of weeks since it's been out, what I can say, honestly, I've not spent a lot of time looking at it. And I mean, in fairness, how much time am I really going to spend looking at this? But I think about the other reveals that we've gotten over the years, whether it's photos or trailers. And I've gotten burned before where I've seen something, I'm like, this looks great. And then you see the actual thing. I was like, oh, maybe not so much. But in that rollout, I was still excited. I'm watching stuff over and over and going back. And I really haven't had that with this. So I think that in and of itself might be kind of telling. But what have we not talked about that you want to talk about? Like, what else stands out to you about this? What other questions do you have? Like, what's on your mind about this?
I want to see the back of that cape. I want to know if there's an S on that cape, because that might, I have to say, if there's a nice golden Kingdom Come crest on the back of that cape, it may be a saving grace. It's not a deal breaker for me, but it's something that I'd really like to see personally. But other than that, it's just, again, I keep circling back to this. It feels like they're trying to make it look cool. And I wish they just let Superman look like Superman. And I really feel like that's what they were kind of teeing everybody up for. But knowingly or unknowingly teeing people up for that with everything that they were posted. And, I have to say, just as a Superman fan, I love Man of Steel. I also love All-Star Superman. I love the costumes from both. I was hoping for a little bit more variance from this one, that they would go further into the classic territory. And there's a way to do that. Again, just letting Superman look like Superman. And if you write a great movie around that, it works. It just works. It's why people keep going back to the 1978 Superman movie. After Man of Steel, Batman, and two different versions of Justice League. I could still put on Superman, the movie, and be like, okay, that's Superman. And I wish they kind of embraced that simplicity with this. But again, we need to root for Superman. not necessarily one director's vision. We need to root for Superman. So that I'm going to continue to be optimistic. I'm going to continue to hope that this makes sense within the context of the movie.
No, I agree. I mean, as much as I know maybe my tone throughout this has largely been one of questioning and critiquing, but I do remain hopeful. I think for me a lot, and for a lot of us, I'm sure, but speaking for myself, a lot is riding on this trailer. I think if it strikes the right chord, I'm going to feel great about this. At first glance, I'm not really there yet, though I want to be. And this was another thing that Zach and I talked about, because I said this and I mean it, where I want to be open-minded and open heart about this. But at the same time, how much should I have to make myself be excited for this? At a certain point, I do kind of have to fall back on what my initial reaction is. And again, with this, there's a degree of melancholy here that it just doesn't necessarily resonate with me, especially absent the context that we don't have. If this were an image for a sequel and we already had the setup for this, maybe I would feel a little bit differently. I don't know. I know a lot of people have talked about, well, no, it's showing you the humanity as he's suiting up, putting the boot on. Okay. I think the setting I don't think the setting quite works in this respect, because had this been him on the porch at the Kent farm, totally different. But he's in this.
That would have been nice. I mean, that's a really cool idea.
I mean, he's in this seemingly gorgeous, luxurious penthouse apartment.
He's doing well.
He's doing well. I mean, we've had exchanges online where people brought this up, and I was like, listen, they don't talk about it, but when he needs to crush that coal into a diamond and he's falling a little behind, he does what he needs to do. But that's the thing. I feel like the setting, even putting aside, oh, there's danger out there, it's not really the setting that you would typically associate with him. If this were the storage room at the Daily Planet or the farm or the fortress, different vibe. I think it might track a little bit better. So again, though, astonishment mixed with a hint of dread, yet with a hopeful finish. That remains my attitude and approach towards this. I really do hope for the best. I'm excited. I don't know how often we'll do these kind of segments or episodes. I think the next time will be when there's a trailer. I think that would probably be the biggest bit of material and news to really pour over and dive into. But
it'll be a game changer.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I don't know, maybe around San Diego Comic-Con, that feels like that might be an appropriate time. But as we've come to learn, it doesn't feel like there's any rhyme or reason to this. Stuff just drops out of nowhere. So it could be then, or it could be, just some random Tuesday. I don't know. But I wanted to spend some time and talk about this just so that we kind of had some space reserved for it on our podcast here. And I really appreciate you coming along for the ride, hopping on for this. So where would you like to direct folks if they want to follow you online?
At Nick Farina. That's where you can find me. That's where I'm posting. And I'm having a great time doing it. And this was a lot of fun. I always enjoy chatting with you about Superman, Anthony. So this was a treat.
I'm so glad we could have you on for this. You were on for the first time not too long ago. We did our comic buying guide episode. It was a lot of fun. It was very well received. And that was the first time you and I spoke. And when I decided I want to fit something in and do something on the costume, I was like, oh, Nick would be perfect for this. And this was a lot of fun. And I appreciate you coming on for this. Audience, thank you. Don't go anywhere. Right after this break, we will be continuing our Superboy coverage with a discussion of Bronze Age, Superboy, and the Legion of Superheroes. Don't miss it. We'll be right back. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. Acme Comics is a locally owned and operated comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina for people of all ages and walks of life. With more than 40 years and a new second location to its name, Acme is a multiple-time Eisner Award nominee. The shop features a significant contemporary and vintage selection, as the Acme team uses their collective knowledge and resources to connect you with the best material. Mail order subscriptions to new releases are available, and all offerings are available anywhere via mail order. Follow Acme on social media and eBay, listen to the Acme Cast on all podcast services, and visit acmecomics.com for much more. Joining me to discuss the Bronze Age Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes comic book series is the resident Superboy historian from the Superboy Beyond YouTube channel, Chris Jacobson. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here finally.
First-time guest. It's great to connect with you. And I'm very curious to pick your brain because we're a few episodes into our big Superboy run of episodes. And I think it's fair to say everyone I've had on the show so far, regardless of their level of experience and history with Superboy, everyone has expressed some level of reservation about the idea of Clark Kent operating as a fully powered, costumed, public-facing hero, Superboy, prior to becoming Superman. And I feel like you might break with that. So I'm curious just to get your take on Clark as Superboy in general, because from what I've gathered from watching you on Superboy Beyond and whatnot, I know you are a fan. And so I'm just curious, what resonates with you about this? What might some of us be missing when it comes to this?
Well, when you think about Superboy as part of Clark's history, this is his like Spider-Man era. You know, when Peter first started. Okay, Peter was a teenager. He had the pratfalls. He had the trying to get the girl. He had the, I want to go to the dance with this girl, but I got to go and stop Doc Ock. Clark has that as well. Now, granted, a lot of the Silver Age era, and I have a lot of the Silver Age books, and I love them. They don't have that Marvel flair to them. Okay, they have just very simple, it's just like reusing a Superman script, but putting Superboy into it instead. Which is why, Lana Lang was always portrayed as trying to figure out who Clark Kent and Superboy were. I get the point that a lot of people make. And one of them is John Byrne. When he took over Superman in 86, he said, look, there's a lot of barnacles on Superman that need to be scraped off. And he made a valid point. And the valid point that he made, and I kind of agree with, but I don't, is he says, if you have a Superboy book and the issue ends with, will Superboy survive? And then 2 weeks later, you have a Superman book. Obviously, it just broke your ability to say, oh, he's not going to make it. What Byrne seemed to forget is a lot of these stories. We already knew that the next issue, he wasn't going to die. It was kind of like the old cliffhangers. We know going into it that he's going to make it into the next issue. It's how he gets from the deadly trap to stopping the villain by the next issue. And Clark having this relationship with his parents, with, Ma and Pa Kent. And I read it, the whole thing of him being adopted resonated with me because I was adopted by my grandparents. And, he's one of the few superheroes out there who we know is adopted. And he doesn't treat being adopted like, oh, well, I'm better than everybody because I'm an alien from outer space. No, he lives amongst us. He was given this beautiful, bucolic upbringing. And the period that we're talking about now with Superboy, especially the Legion, that's also very important to his history. And another thing that John Byrne didn't seem to kind of get when he excised the Legion from his history, excised Superboy from his history, excised one of the greatest things in all of comicdom from his history, Crypto. Many years ago, I had my DC Universe Classics Superboy figure from the Legion box set, and I had one of those DC Direct Crypto figures from the Silver Age box set. And I took a picture of them, standing in front of an American flag, and I put a caption on it that says, "There is nothing more wholesome and all-American than a boy and his dog." even if they are superpowered.
No, I hear you. And I would say right now, where I am in this journey is my perspective is shifting. I don't yet know where I'm fully going to land, but there has already been a shift. And it has made me take a look back at Byrne's Man of Steel in that post-crisis era. That's the version of the character I grew up with and I fell in love with. But now I have an understanding that I didn't as a kid about just how much was obliterated from the character's history. And that's something that I am wrestling with. And I'll also say, to your point, I agree. The notion that Superboy stories aren't necessarily compelling because, well, you know he's going to be all right. You know he ultimately becomes Superman. I agree with your point that there's fun in the cliffhanger, but also, and maybe this is ironic given that I started with the death of Superman. That was my entry point into comics. So there are exceptions. However, generally speaking, even when you're reading a Superman comic, how worried are you really that the character is not going to make it? Right? These are characters we're following. Probably they'll find a way out of whatever jam they're in. So yes, right. I suppose maybe that's heightened even more when you're dealing with a prequel, but still. So I don't know that would necessarily carry the day. I think the piece of this that I still struggle with, maybe you can help me work through this
okay.
with a little bit of therapy here. So right now, I'm at the point where I'm finding, and I'm actually kind of surprised and pleasantly surprised by this. I'm enjoying the Superboy stories. I don't want to spoil our discussion. I did struggle a bit with some of what we read today, but what I've read so far, the Golden Age and Silver Age reading that I've done, and the Superboy TV series watching that I've been doing and that we're going to talk about, and you'll be back for that. I'm finding that, I'm actually enjoying a lot of these Superboy stories. What still is kind of tripping me up is kind of bridging the Superboy and the Superman, because like I've talked about so many times on this show, that transition from Clark to Superman in all of the modern stories and even pre-crisis with Superman the movie, that big moment of Clark becoming Superman, it just kind of feels like we're undermining that if he's already Superboy. And that's the part of this that I'm still hoping that I can kind of get past.
Well, there are some great stories, especially a 4-issue miniseries back in the 80s, which was originally planned as a 12-issue series. It was written by Bob. You knew exactly what I was talking about. There is a moment in that final issue where he says, you know what? Superboy no more. I am Superman now. That helps to bridge the gap a little bit for, like people like yourselves who are struggling with that whole moment of going from the boy to the man.
Gotcha. Yeah. So Superman, The Secret Years, that was what I was holding up as you were referencing it, that 4-issue miniseries. We're going to get there. We're going to have a whole episode on the final days of pre-crisis Superboy. So that's all coming, and I've skimmed through it and I've read about it. I haven't delved into the actual story itself yet, but I'm looking forward to it. And I do hope that helps me overcome that sticking point that I'm still feeling.
Yeah, because a lot of the things with the quote unquote Steel Age, everything that came from Man of Steel on, there seemed to be a lot more, character development, a little, because Byrne originally came from Marvel, he had some of the Marvel flair of writing to the characters. A lot of his updates to the characters, they didn't feel like something that was stuck in 1940s. Now, my whole take on getting rid of Superboy, getting rid of the Legion from his history, getting rid of Krypto, it takes away from, that whole thing of the boy becoming the man. Clark had to have those first steps, and a perfect example is in issue number 2 of Superboy the comic that's based off of the TV show. He had never been shot by a gun before. And a woman gangster shoots him, and he's doing the, clutching his stomach, and then he's wait a minute. I'm intact. Bullets can't hurt me. He needs that to get through, to becoming Superman. You have to go to high school before you can go to college, that kind of thing.
Now, let me ask this to sort of play devil's advocate a little bit here, because I don't disagree about him needing to kind of have that training ground, and where I know you have so much love and affection. You spend so much time talking about the Superboy TV series. That's very much how I feel about Smallville. So there you have an instance where he's having all of these adventures pre-Superman, yet he's not doing it in public and he's not doing it in a costume. So I guess how important is it to you that there's that costumed superhero identity element to those pre-Superman adventures?
Very, very excellent question. Put yourself in Clark's shoes. Okay.
I do it all the
time. You have powers like that. What's the first thing you want to do? You want to go and show off. You realize that you can fly. You want to fly across the sky. You realize that you can lift a truck over your head. You want to lift it up and you want to show people that you can do it. Putting on that costume means that his parents won't get hurt. It's just like Peter Parker wearing that mask. He goes into battle and then nobody's going to go after Aunt May. So Clark creates the persona of the timid Clark, wearing glasses, slicked back, shrug, hunching his shoulders and slouching so that he appears shorter. He's creating the idea that I can still be this superhero. I can still fly around. I can have the adventures, and Ma and Pa can stay safe, whether it be on the farm or whether it be in the Bronze Age when he was, the son of a general store owner.
Yeah.
Because think about it. How many criminals, if they found out who he was, the first thing they would do is go after Ma and Pa?
Sure. If you'll indulge me, maybe my last big picture question, then we can dive in more specifically to these stories that we took a look at from Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. But just kind of generally speaking, since I started doing these episodes, releasing the episodes and just posting on social media and soliciting people's reactions about Clark as Superboy, as you might expect, you definitely get I can't even say so much of a range. I feel like this is an instance where people, not to paint with a broad brush, but people seem to be in two main camps, right? Folks who really grew up with this and love this idea of Clark as Superboy, and folks who really don't. And I'm not saying there aren't any people in the middle. There are, but again, by and large, I'm seeing a fair amount of division along those lines in terms of who likes Clark as Superboy and who doesn't. I mean, I don't even know what the question is, but just what has your experience been, I suppose, dealing with fellow Superman or Superboy fans, whether it's online, through your podcast, at the local comic shop, at a convention? Like, what kinds of conversations do you have with respect to this kind of debate?
Well, it all falls into the category of whether you're talking to somebody who was, pre-1985 a collector or post-1985. Most people post-1985, no Superboy. Superboy's not needed. Pre-1985, it's needed. And to kind of segue a little bit into the Legion, him being Superboy and him being the inspiration for the Legion, and going into the future to work alongside the Legion. The Legion have always said that they learned how to be heroes from reading the historical notes, reading the encyclopedias, as we call them, of the history of heroes. And Superboy was their inspiration. He taught them how to be heroes. But now we have an ontological paradox that keeps going round and around. Superboy inspires the Legion in the far future. They come back in time. They bring him forward. He learns how to be a hero with them. So it's always going to be a circle. Superboy needs the Legion needs Superboy. And if Superman's not Superboy, where does the Legion fall?
No, that's that more and more, again, in really delving into this, I'm appreciating what a significant chapter, not just Superboy was in Superman mythology, but how critical the Legion piece was to all of this. So in terms of what we're going to be talking about, one of the issues collected in the hardcovers that we read was your first comic book, correct?
Yep.
So can you tell me that story?
Okay. So Legion of Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, number 246. I was 4 years old. Mom is trying to get me to go to preschool. And I, being a 4-year-old, what does 4-year-olds always do? They stamp their feet, they scream and yell, and they say, I'm not going. we're at the local stationery store, and they always sold comic books. And Mom looked at me and she said, all right, how about this? I'll buy you a comic book if you go to preschool. And I said, what's a comic book? We're standing right in front of the rack, and she just has this look on her face, and it's like, you're standing right in front of them. So, my 4-year-old head, I turned my head, and the first thing I saw was Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes number 246. And granted, he was not really on the cover except for that side of the front cover where it's him, flying, and then the heads of the Fatal Five. But the main story was the Legionnaires with Sunboy trapped on Mercury. And for some reason, that it caught my eye, and I'd been watching Super Friends on ABC7 here in New York for many, many years at this point. So I knew who Superman was. This was right around the time of the Reeves Superman. That was the first movie Dad ever took me to see in the theaters. I knew Superman, and this just blew me away. I couldn't even read at this point, but I saw that costume, and that was the one that I had to. And truth be told, that comic is actually what got me to read. And also, Mom taught me how to read on that. And that book, it stayed in my collection for many years, falling apart every few days because I kept reading it and reading it and reading it. I think I only have the final page left of it. And it's taped inside on a piece of paper, and it's stuffed inside a replacement copy that I got because I had to keep my late mother with me, in my collection because it was her start. She started me. So anytime I've seen Superboy, on TV, in comics, it always brings me back to that fundamental moment of the collection where it all began.
Oh, that's beautiful. No, thank you for sharing that. And I've told my origin story. We've had many guests come on and share something similar, different issues, but that formative moment when you get that first comic and the impression that it makes and the kind of the path that it can set you on is so powerful. And I imagine that anyone listening to this, it might not be Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes number 246, but whatever that is for the audience, I know they can put themselves in your shoes and kind of tap into that feeling because it is so core and elemental. And one of the things that I'm, recognizing is that when we look at Superboy, we really do have these distinct avenues here. We have the Smallville set stories and we have the future set stories with the Legion of Superheroes. And I'm finding I'm gravitating much more towards the Smallville stories where they're really Superboy tales and he's the central focus versus the Legion stories where he's part of a team. He's a member of an ensemble. And in fairness, I don't even say that as a critique because I recognize that what's a little bit of a roadblock for me, I want more of a focus and an emphasis on Superboy. I recognize that that could very well be the selling point for folks who really love Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. This idea that he is part of a team and he's learning and he's growing with them. Does that kind of ring true for you?
Oh yeah. And if you look at his later years with the Justice League, I don't think he would be able to work as well with characters like Green Lantern or Batman or Wonder Woman or Martian Manhunter or The Flash or Aquaman if he didn't have that formative experience being a part of the Legion. The Legion taught him not only how to be a hero, but how to work well with others. Now, granted, most people would say, oh, well, he learned how to work well with others because of the Kents. But the Kents can teach him how to work with humans. The Legion can teach him how to work with the strengths of this hero and that hero. You go into a fortress on an alien planet. The first thing you would think is, okay, why don't we just send Ultra Boy, Mon-El, and Superboy because there are heavy hitters. Yes, sometimes you don't need to send the heavy hitters. Sometimes you need to send the Legion Espionage Squad, Invisible Kid, Chameleon Boy, Phantom Girl, and being a part of this, he can start to realize everybody's got their strengths and weaknesses, and how we do this is based upon that. And that's why those stories where they had the JLA, JSA team ups, where they would always pair off 2 members of the JLA, 2 members of the JSA, he was kind of a part of that. And he realized, you know what? We should send Alan Scott and Barry Allen along with Batman and myself into this room, and these 4 go into this room, because he realizes you can't take care of an egg with a sledgehammer all the time.
We are an affiliate of BCW Supplies, so the next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On to banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. I want to kind of lay out for the audience what it is that you and I read. Now, we did a very brief overview of Superboy's publishing history in our kickoff episode, but just to circle back to this. So we're talking about the series that started as Superboy in 1949, and then starting with issue 197 in 1973, the logo changes to Superboy starring the Legion of Superheroes. With issue 222 in 1976, the logo changes again to Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. And then with issue 231 in 77, the title officially changes to Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. And will remain that way until issue 259, when it simply becomes Legion of Superheroes after Superboy departs the title. And in terms of what you and I took a look at specifically, there were these 2 hardcover collections that were released in 2017 and 2018, Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, volumes 1 and 2, which collects essentially that entire stretch that I just laid out there, once that title officially changes, that is. So from 234 to 259, as well as the all-new collector's edition C55, that tabloid-size special where Saturn Girl and Lightning Lad are married, that's collected in there as well. Yep. And a couple of issues, very fascinating issues that I really do want to make sure we spend at least a couple of minutes on, of DC Comics Presents, numbers 13 and 14, a Pete Ross storyline. In terms of credits, there were many creators who worked on these issues. On the writing side, primarily, we had Paul Levitz, along with Len Wein, Jerry Conway, Paul Kupperberg, and Jack Harris. And on the art side, primarily Mike Grell, James Sherman, Joe Staton, and more. Now, we'd be here all night if we went issue by issue here. What I really want to do is kind of get a sense from you in terms of specific stories, but even more importantly, themes, dynamics. What were the patterns that really stood out to you that emerged, whether reading them initially as a kid or revisiting them now? Also curious if your perspective on these has changed over the years, but just to give the audience a sense kind of some of the types of stories that we're talking about here. And this is it's an interesting instance because I would venture to say, I know there are people listening to this who, like yourself, have a lot of affinity for these stories and knowledge of these stories, but I also know there are plenty of folks who don't. And
right.
I'll say this, and I hope you won't take offense because you and I only recently connected. So this is not a slight towards you. You were not the first person I asked to do this episode. And again, had I connected with you earlier, I'm sure you would have been, but there were a few folks I went through who I know do have interest in the Legion, but what I kind of got back in a lot of instances was, oh yeah, I like the Legion, but I like Great Darkness Saga. Like they like, kind of a later period or something like that. So this stretch in particular, I know it has its fans, but at the same time, and just kind of what I've been hearing from people about this period of Superboy history, I think there's probably a good number who are not familiar with these.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, this is kind of, we'll call it almost the lost era of Superboy and the Legion.
So just in terms of giving our audience a little bit of a rundown of some of the main stories that we took a look at, there's an issue where a number of Legionnaires are fused together after an energy blast. They become the composite Legionnaire. They're hunted by a bounty hunter. There's the Legion's Super Secret, which deals with the brainwashing of Superboy, which I want to circle back to, and I have a couple of questions for you. There's a quote-unquote vacation issue where on Cosmic Boy's homeworld, they have to go up against the World Smith. And that's also where we have, in a backup story, Lightning Lad and Saturn Girl deciding to move forward and get married, even though, according to Legion code, it will mean that they have to leave the Legion. Then we have that tabloid-sized collector's edition issue where they do get married, but there are timeline shenanigans, and it turns out the Time Trapper is behind it, and we have a showdown between the Time Trapper and the Legion. There's one with Armageddon, who holds Brand hostage and forces the other members of the Legion to retrieve these items for him. There's a really cool noirish issue with Ultra Boy where he is framed for murder. I thought that was a standout.
The Jim Starlin issue.
Yeah, that one definitely stood out. We have, in terms of story arcs, true arcs, I think the most substantial one that we had in these hardcovers was the Earth War Saga, which is this 5-issue storyline, and we have battles on multiple fronts that ultimately all proved to be due to the machinations of Mordru, who's returned. We also have the anniversary issue 250, and that kicks off a 2-parter with Omega, the living embodiment of hate. There's a face-off against the League of Super Assassins. We have that Pete Ross 2-parter from DC Comics Presents. We have really the only true Superboy-centric and Smallville set, at least for a portion of the story, issue, which is the Super Spectacles swipe. And then, of course, we have issue 259, which is where Superboy bids farewell to the Legion for a time, though he will return later on, but he'll be gone for a while. And again, that's where he cedes his title fully to the Legion of Superheroes. That's not every single issue in those couple of hardcovers, but those were, I think, some of the bigger ones and the larger storylines and the ones that really kind of stood out. So I just wanted to kind of rattle them off just so the audience kind of has a sense of what we're talking about. But I'll kind of circle back to my question to you of what stands out to you the most with these.
Well, you asked me, do I, looking at the stories that I read when I was younger and then looking at them again now, the brainwashing of Superboy issue. As a kid, I thought that was great. You got to prevent him from knowing the future. But looking back on it now, there was no need to do technology for that. And just to get him to forget things. Just Saturn Girl put a post-hypnotic suggestion in his head to forget everything that he learns about his own future. Like Johns did in Secret Origin. There was really no need for that. I mean, it was just a great way for them to have this cover of him with essentially a mind control helmet on it.
Right. And Brainiac 5 is claiming that this is just a routine examination that Superboy is undergoing. But no, in fact, there is actually this brainwashing. And the story does account for it, or at least tries to, where Brainiac has this line about how as Superboy is getting older, essentially they can't merely rely on the hypnotic suggestion that they need something more powerful to prevent him from remembering these things when he goes back to his own time. But yeah, I didn't like this so much. That was,
it paints the Legion very poorly in this issue. It's the old saying of the road to hell is paved with good intentions. They have good intentions, but eventually he's going to find these things out that they're doing to him. And it's going to be like, I'm ditching you guys. I'm out of here. This is an invasion of my privacy. If Saturn Girl had presented it to him and said, look, periodically, I'm going to have to take control of your mind and just reinforce the post-hypnotic suggestion, Clark would have looked at her and said, if you feel this is necessary to prevent me from messing with the time stream because of things I'm going to find out, do it. There was also that whole thing of the Legionnaires are aging, but he's not. And they're trying to prevent him from finding that out too. That was in the issue. And that was a little off.
Yes, that was weird because there was this business. Eventually Superboy realizes what's going on and he is surprisingly okay with it, which I also didn't buy, but he trusts them so much. And essentially the cover story they give is that the secret that they're trying to prevent him from retaining his knowledge of is that there's this ability in the future to create artificial life. But that ends up being a ruse. It's a misdirect. After he departs back to his time, they talk instead about how it's this serum that's allowed them to extend their lives in the future. That's what they don't want Superboy to know about. I have a couple of questions because when we did our Silver Age episode and we looked at some key stories from the late 50s and 60s, right, in the Silver Age, most of them were the Smallville set tales. We looked at a few Legion stories, but not a lot, and none that got into this business about the memory erasure. So this is what I want to ask you. So aside from this brainwashing, full-on brainwashing in a machine business, is the idea that Saturn Girl placed this post-hypnotic suggestion such that whatever Superboy learns in the future, I don't know, about his own future or historically significant events, he would lose that memory when he's back in the past, but it would,
right.
Would he regain those memories when he's back in the future?
Yes.
Okay.
There's a perfect example of this story there, of this idea. There was a story, and it was before this era that we're talking about today, these two books. He meets this beautiful dark-haired girl when he comes into the future, and he's immediately in transpire, and he doesn't know why. He's falling for her, and she keeps running away from him. And she tells him that her name is Elna, Elna. And then over the course of the story, we learn that she is the direct descendant of one Clark Joseph Kent and Lois Lane. And she's the spitting image of Lois Lane. And that's why he fell for her. The moment he comes back in time, you can see the moment as he reemerges in the past. He's like, what was I just thinking about? Was it a girl? I can't remember. So she revealed to him that she's his descendant. And so he had to forget these things. So they could have just left things as is. Now, I get the whole thing with the extension of life formula. If he remembers what's going to happen to Ma and Pa, the first thing that he would do is bring it to them when they're on their deathbed. But there's an easier way that they could have gotten out of this. All the Legion would have to do is say, over 1,000 years, humanity has evolved in such a way that it only works on us. It won't work back then. They didn't need to do this.
Yeah, no, that would work. And so that ultimately is why he leaves the Legion in this final issue that we looked at here, where they're battling the psycho warrior who can sort of bring forth your worst fears. And what he shows Superboy is how Ma and Pa die, right? This fever plague that they contract when they're on this vacation, because he builds them a cruise ship and they take this vacation, they find the treasure chest and they open it up. And, we know from that Silver Age story, he takes them back in time and he thinks that's where they contract the plague, but it was actually from the present day opening of the chest and dealing with the items in there. And so after this encounter with the psycho warrior, he now knows how his quote unquote foster parents are going to die. And he's traumatized by this. There's this sense among the Legionnaires that it would be too difficult for him, essentially, every time he comes back to the future, that those memories would kick back in. And so Saturn Girl places this very strong suggestion in his mind to not come back, which
yes,
I guess maybe a couple more questions, and I appreciate you clarifying all of this for me because it's interesting. And this is definitely something that I really don't love this aspect of all of this. So not the brainwashing in the machine, but the post-hypnotic suggestion. He knew about that?
Yeah.
He knew about that. He's on board with that.
He was okay with that because, even, writers like Edmund Hamilton, who wrote back in this period, said, no man should know too much about his own destiny. He knows enough that he is going to become Superman, but he doesn't need to know, the exact date that he's going to decide to be Superman. He doesn't need to know the day he's going to meet Lois Lane. He doesn't need to know the date that Ma and Pa get a splinter. Okay. The whole point about life, and I hate to get a little metaphysical here, but is we learn by experiencing, and putting that post-hypnotic suggestion on him helps him to actually experience it. Because if he remembered everything that he learned in the future, there is a chance that he could turn to the dark side, shall we say. Because now he'll become a dictator and he'll try to prevent things from happening. And I don't like Superman goes bad stories, but that's exactly what something like that prevents.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. And then, so when he goes to the past, again, it's not as if he is losing all of his memories of his future adventures. It's just that specific, historically significant information.
Yeah, look at it this way. You find out that you're going to have a car accident and break your foot on May 7th. But in the process of learning that, you still have an adventure. She puts the suggestion in him that, I'm not going to remember anything that happened in that adventure that can tell me what my future is. But everything else, the broader strokes of the battle, I'm still going to remember. Yeah, we took on Mordru. Yeah, we took on a planet of Daxamites who went crazy. But he's not going to remember anything that they told him about his own future.
So here's the thing. I really, like we're talking about, I really don't like this business about the brainwashing him in the machine because the suggestion isn't enough. And even though eventually he figures it out and they talk about it, they're still lying to him about exactly what secret they're trying to protect. So that kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. But as far as the suggestion generally and the memory that he loses when he returns home to the past, I'm of two minds with this because on the one hand, everything you're saying totally tracks. And if he retained all of his memories, I would probably have an issue with that. It's like, well, he knows too much about the future. And to your point, that kind of knowledge definitely could be dangerous. So this idea that he's on board with what Saturn Girl has placed in his mind, this mechanism that allows him to be in the future, have all of these adventures, but not compromise the timeline, because when he goes back, he remembers the relationships and the adventures, but not the specifics that would maybe lead him to try to change something, whether on purpose or by accident, right? Could happen either way. So I get all of that. But at the same time, I don't know, just this idea of his mind, of his memory continually, like every time he comes back, there's this process that he's undergoing. And then now really taken to an extreme with this machine here. I don't know. It's funny because I think of we spent a lot of time on the podcast, the mid-2000s storyline, Identity Crisis, and all of that friction within the Justice League about erasing memories of villains and even of some heroes as well. Now, of course, that was different because they were not willing participants, as opposed to here where Superboy is going along with this. So maybe I'm arguing against myself here, but I don't know. That aspect of it, I don't know. I don't.
Well, I always looked at Saturn Girl's post-hypnotic suggestion as not an immediate, I remember everything that I learned last time. It just slowly comes back in, and there's like doorways that open up, and it's almost like there's a little version of Imra standing there saying, "Okay, we're going to the next step. Are you okay?" That's the way I looked at it. The suggestion was, forget it until you come back to the future, and then slowly regain the memory so that it doesn't cause you to have a nervous breakdown.
Right.
Because remember, she's a telepath, so this kind of stuff would be, like second nature to her.
that was definitely one big ticket item that I wanted to ask you about, the memory aspect of all of this. Beyond that, like I said, I think I did struggle with this material a little bit. The biggest issue that I think I had with this was what I was saying before, where Superboy is really just one of many in this. And even as I was kind of making a list of things that I wanted to talk to you about, I was really trying to drill down on, okay, what were the most relevant to Superboy aspects of these stories? And it was not a long list. He's really just part of the group.
Yeah, you can equate the way they treat him as almost like Cyclops in the X-Men. You know, yeah, he's got the leadership qualities to him, but he's one of an ensemble. You know, it's not like, you know, it's his book. He's there. They're the backup characters. And this isn't the first time, you know, that the Legion took over his book. He had a great run of adventure comics that slowly but surely he got pushed out of for the Legion. And now this is the second time that this has happened. And then within a few months of issue 259, they started New Adventures of Superboy, which gets us to the real period where I really, really started reading Superboy comics. You know, I mean, this was my first foray into it, but New Adventures, that was the time where I got to know him.
Yeah, I mean, I think in going through these two hardcovers, I don't know that I necessarily expected anything differently. I mean, I think I kind of went in knowing that, okay, it's a team book and he's part of the team. I guess, yeah, I just longed for more Superboy centric stories. But that's the thing, even though it's Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, it's not like, oh, this is his team and they're revolving around him and there's stories about his arc, his growth. It's really these big sci-fi adventures and they all have their part to play. And I don't know, if I take a step back, maybe there is something valuable or endearing when we talk about the characters' overall growth and maturity, that he does have that role where he's just kind of, again, one of many. He's not the leader of the team, not the one that all of the action revolves around. Maybe there is something of that. At the same time, it just didn't go a long way towards my really loving these stories.
I mean, there are certain things about these stories that I get your point that they're not Superboy centric, but you know, there are other things where, you know, you get to see him interacting with this character. And, you know, there are certain characters that he gets along really well with, like Mon-El. Mon-El is essentially his big brother. You know, there's Ultra Boy, who they have a little bit of a friendly rivalry. You know, nothing, you know, where they're calling each other, you jackass. No, you're a jackass. No, it's just, you know, it's almost brotherly between the two of them. And then you have characters like Wildfire, who they can't stand each other. And, you know, the reason that they can't stand each other is because Wildfire won the election to leadership, and Superboy doesn't understand why. And finally, they point out to him, you have to be here 24/7. You can't leave the past for more than a couple of hours or a couple of days at a time. And he's finally like, oh. But he still doesn't like Wildfire. And then you've got characters like Lightning Lad. There's a little bit of rivalry with them, not too much. You've got characters like Duo Damsel, who we didn't find out till many years later that she actually was harboring feelings for him. You know, even though she was involved with Chuck, she was in love with Superboy at the same time. You know, there's dynamic between each and every one of the members. You know, he gets along great with Cosmic Boy and with Imra, and obviously with Mon-El and Ultra Boy. You know, he deals well with Brainiac 5, even though we all know what his future with a character named Brainiac is going to be. But he gets along well with him. And then there's the stories that occur in the second volume of this of these 2 volumes, where Brainiac goes complete batshit crazy.
Yeah, that was pretty wild. To your point, though, about Superboy and Wildfire, one of the things that really did stand out to me, and I liked this, I appreciated it, was in that wedding issue where Superboy shows up in the future, as he normally does, and the timeline is vastly different to him. Yeah. Where in the past, the United Nations had dissolved and the Earth had been plunged into this war and tensions are high, and it's not at all the scenario that he is expecting when he arrives in the future. And the other Legionnaires don't know that anything is amiss, that the timeline has been changed. I mean, ultimately what all of them and we will learn is that the Time Trapper was manipulating events and also has a miracle machine. And you know, I've been talking about this a lot in these episodes where there are a lot of aspects of the mythology introduced in this era that I never met in the original stories, but that I saw brought back or referenced in stories that I did grow up with or did read more recently. And we spent a lot of time on all of DC's Crisis events, including Final Crisis, and the Miracle Machine ends up playing a very critical role in the climax of that story. And so it was just cool now to kind of go back and see, oh yeah, there's Miracle Machine more in its historical context here. But in that wedding issue, you do see that tension between Superboy and Wildfire, where Superboy wants to investigate these changes to the timeline that he knows are present, but that no one else seems to. And Wildfire is far more resistant to that. And Lightning Lad and Saturn Girl have been abducted by the Lunarites after their wedding, and Wildfire is focused on that. And so they really kind of have these dual mindsets and missions, and they do split off. But I thought that aspect of it was interesting, and I liked seeing that. I liked seeing that tension there. So that was definitely something that stood out.
Very much so, you know. And I actually didn't even read that tabloid size issue until about 10 years ago when I got an original copy of it. That was one piece of Legion lore that I didn't know until 10 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big one, literally and figuratively. Let's jump to the Earth War saga for a minute here, because again, in kind of running through all of these stories, that was the most substantial multi-part storyline that we had, where you have a contingent of Legionnaires sent to guard these diplomatic talks between the United Planets and the Dominators, right, to try to keep them safe. But as soon as they get there, a bomb goes off, and there's an attack on a bridge, so something's amiss. And then you also have these attacks on Earth where you have the Resource Raiders, who are really the advanced scouts for the Kuns. Am I saying that right? The Kuns?
Kuns.
And of course, they're ultimately being manipulated by the Dark Circle, but it's ultimately actually Mordru who's pulling all of the strings and orchestrating all of these attacks here. I guess let me just ask you, I mean, what stands out to you the most about that multi-part Earth War storyline? Because that was the biggest, like I said, biggest arc, I think, in these hardcovers.
Well, what stands out most, I mean, beyond the fact that Paul Levitz is a fantastic writer. You know, he can weave a space opera better than anybody. You know, and that's me being a Star Trek fan also, and loving the original series and saying that he's doing better than what they did on the original series. You know, he's weaved this very intricate, almost film noir, you know, political intrigue. It's almost akin to The Manchurian Candidate, with all these things going on. And now you've got Superboy and the Legion caught in the middle, trying to get to the bottom of it. And then it turns out that it's the most dangerous of their foes who's behind the whole thing, Mordru. You wouldn't think that Mordru, a sorcerer, would have anything to do with political machinations. And yet he is. And that's just a surprising story right there. Given what happens later with Brainiac 5, I would have made Brainiac 5 the villain, but that's just me.
Yeah, your point is well taken. I think it's definitely surprising when you get that reveal. I guess for me it was just like, okay, it's not this group, it's this other race of invaders, and oh, it's not them, it's the Dark Circle. Well, it's not them, it's more. It was quite a lot of turns and reveals, but But I don't know, at the same time, that helps sustain that multi-part story. And to your point, it's like, yeah, you would not expect more Drew, given the setup that we had here for this. It was interesting too, because when ultimately we really get down to the final battle between them here, it's ultimately a battle of wills, essentially, that it comes down to, and the Legion really standing united together and really essentially overpowering his will with their own united, which I thought was cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just shows, that if anybody should still be writing the Legion, it's Paul Levitz. He knows these characters inside and out. Jeff Johns knows these characters inside and out because he grew up on the same books that I grew up on. He even said in one interview that, I didn't really like the Marvel characters because, they weren't as cosmic as the DC characters. And I love the Legion because they are cosmic, and I agree with him on that. The Legion are the most cosmic entity there is. They're representatives from every corner of the United Planets in the 30th century. Yeah, there's some issues with, shall we say, being mostly Caucasians, but beyond that, they are great characters to read, to understand. I mean, each one of them, and this goes back to the 60s when they were first. No, it was the 50s when they were first introduced. This goes back to then. Over the course of the years, people like Kurt Swan wanted to draw them in such a way that you didn't have generic blonde guy number one, generic blonde guy number two. They all had distinctive faces and costumes, and every writer who's come in has given them each distinctive personalities. Monel is the wanderer. Monel is the one who goes out into the space. He wants to explore. Wildfire, and to a certain extent, Lightning Lad are the hotheads. Saturn Girl is the cerebral one. She's the smart one. She's the one who's sitting there being the reasoning one. And then there's Brainiac 5, who's just intelligence without personality.
This episode made possible in part by educator, hobby comic book collector, and pop culture enthusiast Sam Lim. Sam is based in the South Jersey area and is looking to connect with other comics fans as well as retailers. They're also looking for comic shops to explore, so recommendations are welcome. Be sure to follow Sam on Instagram at SZL Comics to see their latest comic pickups and shop adventures.
Hey, it's Bill Bodkin, editor-in-chief of thepopbreak.com. Join myself, Amanda Rivas, Al Manarino, and a cavalcade of awesome guests on the Socially Distanced Podcast, the flagship podcast of thepopbreak.com.
And it's Amanda Rivas. If you're a pop culture obsessed nerd like we are, then you need to make Socially Distanced an integral part of your life. We talk all the things, Marvel, Star Wars, everything on Disney Plus pretty much, as well as the hottest trending shows and news in the world of pop culture.
This is definitely Al Manarino and not Bill Bodkin. So listen to the Socially Distanced Podcast every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so we can eventually get Disney Plus to give us advertising money. Please, we could use the money. I have children.
Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of two of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. We got to talk about this Pete Ross story. And this is kind of an interesting button to an earlier conversation we had in our Silver Age episode, because in that episode, we talked about the issue of Superboy where Pete discovers that Clark is Superboy, but decides not to tell him and rather just helps preserve his secret, helps create covers for him without Clark knowing why Pete is even doing this, which I thought was such a great angle. Then we get to this story here in DC Comics Presents numbers 13 and 14. And this is the story where Pete's son is taken by this warmongering alien race. And Pete goes to Clark and rips open his shirt. It's like, I need Superman. And in a shockingly fast moment, right after all these years of not letting on that he knows Clark's secret, now in this dire situation, like just all bets are off. He's like, I know you're Superman. I need you to get my son. And you get that quick flashback to that Superboy issue when they're in the tent and lightning strikes and Pete sees him. And the payoff to this story, which then leads us into the second part, was a little bit of a tough pill to swallow. I was curious how you felt about it.
I agree with you on it. It is a very tough pill to swallow. But if you read it in the context of the story, Clark has to leave young Matt Ross where he is because he's going to grow up to become this great warrior to help these people. And if he takes him away, war is going to occur that will never end. You know, it's the old damned if you do and damned if you don't. Do I prevent war and cause my best friend since I was a kid to hate me for the rest of my life? Or do I save this boy and cause unending war? You know, this is the kind of moral dilemma that Captain Kirk would have been in. And, you know, there's no easy answer here. Now, what happens in the next issue, I get it is the payoff to it, and it is horrendous, but still, there should have been a way to get Matt back. And I think eventually they do get Matt back.
Yes. So I didn't read those actual issues, but I did read about them. And yes, eventually, I mean, Pete's downward spiral continues. Then it turns out there's a magical character that's been influencing him. Again, I really only just read the broad strokes of this, but they are ultimately able to find out a way to get the son home. But the fact that Superman leaves the son on this planet to fulfill this destiny, the reason why this two-parter is in this hardcover is that first issue involves the Legion of Superheroes. And the reason Superman knows about Pete's son's destiny is because of the Legion. And they're like, no, you have to leave him here. And I guess that ties in with what we've been talking about with the brainwashing and the post-hypnotic suggestion and, you know, the risk of knowing about the future and not changing things and all of that business. I guess you kind of see a different flavor of that here. It's the sort of thing where I guess it does make for a compelling story, because just a moment ago, you were laying out all of the reasons why Superman had to leave the boy there. And I can't really dispute that, right? Based on what's presented to us. But then Pete's reaction, and even as far as he goes in the next issue, for anyone who's not familiar, Pete in his rage and in his grief uses a time machine to bring Superboy to the present, and then another device to switch bodies with Superboy. So Pete in Superboy's body attacks Superman. And it's a great cover because it's Superboy fighting Superman, and how could they even be existing in the same time, right? That violates one of the central rules of all of this.
Yeah, DC had established that no two people can be in the same time. You know, a future version of yourself cannot be in the same time period as a previous version of yourself. So the only way that they could work that out is if it wasn't Superboy's mind in Superboy's body. It works, and then you got Superboy in Pete's body, and he's trying to work out how a 30-year-old man's body works, and he's trying to get out of the I think he was tied up in ropes, and he's trying to get out of it. I forget how. You know what? I got the book right here.
He uses a Bunsen burner to burn the rope, and then he's looking around. He gets out, and he's like, "Oh, well, it's Smallville. It's years later, but it's still Smallville. I know my way around." And so he goes to the old Kent house, which is all boarded up, and then he goes to his old lair, and everything's been cleared out. Which, not to nitpick, but it's like, why would he think his stuff would? I mean, I guess it's a lair, so maybe he figured his future self kept it there. But it's like, I don't know. It would stand to reason that you'd want to get all that stuff out of there. But one of the things that was left behind was Krypto's dog whistle. And so and then Krypto, to your earlier point about the importance of Krypto to the rescue, and attacks Pete in Superboy's body. And eventually they're able to get Pete to stand down and switch back and all of that. But his position, his role, his point of view in all of this made all the sense. And I really felt for him. Not that the means he employed were right, but as a father myself, it's like, I mean, I guess what I would, the one thing I would say is, could I go live with him on the planet? I mean, like, that's the one thing that didn't seem to be bandied about as an option. But I just think about myself in that situation. Like, well, if it's the case that he can't leave that planet, I'll go there too. But I really felt for him, and it was really heartbreaking because, in that Silver Age discussion, we talked about what a stand-up guy Pete was. Even before he learned the secret, he was still always standing up for Clark, defending him, from the bullies and the other kids in school. And then when he learns the secret, and he's so selfless and altruistic to just keep it to himself and just help in whatever way he can. And
that's what a best friend is for.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why they did it that way is they didn't want Pete to just walk up to Clark one day and say, I know you're Superboy. They wanted Clark to one day realize, you know what? He's my best friend. How can I keep this from my best friend? And then eventually, he would go to Pete and he'd say, Pete, I've got a secret to tell you. And I know it's going to change the dynamics of our relationship. And he says, I'm Superboy. And all Pete would have to say is, yeah, I've known since our camping trip. Wait a minute, you've known? Yeah, I was waiting for you to tell me. Why do you think you've been getting all those excuses so easily? Because I've been helping you. I mean, there's a great issue in great story in Superman Family. It's an issue that brought back Gary the Witch Boy as Garrock the Sorcerer. Pete realizes that Superboy's got to get out of Lana Lang's house to go do Superboy stuff. So they're in the process of doing up posters for Lana to run for school president, and Pete automatically just, oops! I dropped all the paint on my clothes. Clark, can you run down to your father's store and get us some more paint? This is the kind of thing that a best friend would do. And he did it, as you said, so altruistically, so selflessly, because he realized that this is his best friend. This is why his best friend acts so timid all the time, because he's got to hide. And, had this story in DC Comics Presents not been done the way it was done, maybe we would have had a story where Pete comes back and he says, by the way, I've known all these years and I've kept it a secret. And that's another payoff that we get during Alan Moore's great Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow.
Yeah, that was a very, very tragic end for the character. I like I said, this one really stood out. And like I said, made for a fascinating and heartbreaking payoff to what we had previously read. And it would have been nice. I know that the appeal of the Superman versus Superboy is strong, and it's a striking cover, and the action's cool. You have the mystery initially of like, how is Superboy here? Why is he doing this? You don't realize it's Pete until later on. It would have been cool if we could have had maybe some sort of middle ground and one of the issues where you had something akin to that kind of conversation. You were talking about yes, all the stuff that had been going on. That would have been cool, but that one definitely stood out. And then one of the other, again, really Clark-centric stories here, the Super Spectacles swipe, where...
Oh, that's such a great story.
I mean, in most of these issues, in terms of what was collected in these hardcovers that we've been talking about, if you see Superboy in Smallville at all, it's just as he's leaving Smallville to travel to the future or returning. You don't spend a lot of time with him in Smallville in these stories. But this is one where you see him come back and he goes to the Kent General Store and he puts on that sweater and the glasses. And there is this longing to be with the Legion. And he has this bit about how, maybe he won't always have to hide like this, the way he does now in his Clark Kent guise, and the way he doesn't have to when he's with the Legion. And so I kind of like that he was wrestling with that. And then you get a lot of those classic tropes. He's carrying all these boxes for Pa, and Lana's there, and she's like, how are you carrying all these boxes? And so he, at super speed, like smacks them and smashes all the cans, down to the basement below, and then pretends they're just empty boxes. So I thought that was kind of a cool setup, because you get some of those trappings of the more classic Superboy and Smallville stories, but still within the context of he's having these adventures with the Legion. He's kind of unlocking this other part of himself. There's a little bit of of tension in terms of having to hide the way he is. And he tries later to use his heat vision and his glasses melt. And of course, that shouldn't be the case because they're made of glass from the rocket. But these are just normal glasses because someone, unbeknownst to him, had stolen his spectacles, the actual lenses. So the villain stole the lenses and used them in conjunction with a time machine or a phantom zone projector to essentially abduct the population of Tokyo and ransom them in exchange for 10,000 human slaves. But I love the kicker to all of this, kind of fight fire with fire, so to speak. So some of the Legionnaires go back to Krypton before its destruction to obtain more of that Kryptonian glass.
Yes, and you have baby Kal-El there, and Shrinking Violet is sitting on one of the lenses, and he sees it, and then when they come back, she's sitting on the lenses exactly in the same position. He's like, Violet, have I ever seen you sitting like that before? I think she says, well, we've got a long story for you. Just the humor right there in all that. And I mean, this is the period where you've got, serious stuff, and then you've got, just oddball, wacky stuff, that's still somewhat serious. I mean, that is such a great issue, but nothing beats from this era the League of Super Assassins. Do you remember a little book from Marvel called The X-Men?
Sure.
And you recall a team that they used to battle called the Shi'ar Imperial Guard.
Mm-hmm.
Shi'ar Imperial Guard are Marvel's XP of the Legion. The League of Super Assassins are the X-Men.
Gotcha.
And if you look at them, they're almost direct one-for-one copies. Block is essentially Colossus. Silver Slasher is both at the same time Wolverine and Colossus. Nutrax is Professor X because he has mental abilities and he's in a chair. Lazon, he's Sunfire. The Mist character is essentially Storm. And then you got Titania, that's Thunderbird right there. And then, of course, Nutrax, he has little elements of Cyclops in him with the visor. So they couldn't do an actual Legion X-Men team up, and they wanted to do it, so they did it through analogs.
Yeah, no, that was definitely a fun one, yeah.
Yeah, just like they couldn't do a team up between the Invaders and the Freedom Fighters, so they each created counterparts for them in their respective books. Same thing with the JLA and the Avengers. You've got the Avengers going up against the Squadron Supreme, and you got the JLA going up against the Heroes of Angkor. So this was a long-standing, crossover without actually crossing over.
Right on. Look, you have so much knowledge and love and affection for this era and these stories. I'm glad, one of the things that I'm really happy to hear in talking to you is that these stories continue to offer so much enjoyment for you and you still get a lot out of them. And I wish I could say I got as much out of them as you do, but I definitely found it to be a worthwhile endeavor going through them. Yep. One thing that I recognize is that I think where maybe I hit a little bit of a wall in terms of accessing these stories, I think was in looking at them in the context of Superboy and this Superboy event and wanting more Superboy in these stories. And I think we'll see if and when I do more of a Legion focused run of episodes, and maybe I would go back to these issues and really read them more from that perspective, not so much looking for Superboy any place I can, but really just trying to kind of surrender myself to this team dynamic and to this vast cast of characters and appreciate them more purely for Legion stories, not for the Superboy of it all. I think I probably would get more out of them. And I do very much recognize that. I know we haven't poured through every story in this. I think we've hit on some key ones and we've talked again a lot about those broad strokes and themes and everything, but is there anything specific or general we didn't talk about that you really want to, that we'd be remiss if we didn't when talking about this era?
Well, the only thing that I can really say about the era is this is the final days of Superboy with the Legion until he comes back during the Reflecto story in Legion, and then later on the Great Darkness saga, and then a couple of issues here and there pre-Crisis in the Baxter series. This is his last hurrah with the Legion. Real last hurrah. You know, yeah, he does come back during the Great Darkness saga and the Reflecto story, but he's only a guest there, essentially. He's not really a part of the he's a part of the team, but he's not part of the team. It feels like he doesn't really fit in with them now, because a couple of years has passed for them, and he's still 16, 17 years old. I mean, Monel is always going to welcome him back. He always looks at him as the little brother he never had. Ultra Boy is also going to look at him the same way. Imra is always going to look at him like, you know, that young kid we tricked into joining the Legion. But it's almost like when you have great friends when you're in high school, and then 10 years goes by, you go back to your reunion, and everybody still likes each other, but you're so different. It's the same thing. And especially if somebody has stayed the same, you know, no matter what. You know, this is the last hurrah of Superboy and the Legion. This is the last hurrah of him with his greatest friends. You know, he's only maybe a year away from Ma and Pa dying at this point. You know, he's only a year away from going off to college and growing up into the man he's destined to be. This is the end of an era. You know, and Byrne lost something when he got rid of Superboy. He lost the innocence, and he's even admitted it now that maybe I should have kept Superboy as part of his history. Paul Levitz pointed it out to him when he was planning on doing this. He says, John, you do realize that if you remove Superboy from Superman's history, you're affecting the Legion. We'll figure it out some other way down the road. John, this is going to really mess everything up. And he wasn't wrong. That's why we had to get the Pocket Universe Superboy.
Right.
Mr. Scott said it best in Star Trek 3. The more you overtake the plumbing, the easier it is to stop up the drain. And these kind of things just prove it. You take Superboy out, it's like dominoes. Who inspired the Legion now? Who was a part of the Legion during the Great Darkness saga, during the Sun Eater saga? Who was there? So now we have to create another alternate Earth where there's another alternate Superboy. And in some ways it worked, and in other ways it didn't.
And we'll continue to talk about all of that as we make our way through. But like I said, I really appreciate your insight, your knowledge with all of this. And this is not the last time we'll have you on the show. We will have you and your co-host, Tom, back here not too long from now, and we'll talk about the Superboy TV series. So on that note, what would you like to share with people about Superboy Beyond?
We generally speaking, we just handled the Superboy TV series, but the Beyond in our title goes towards, you know, sometimes going off on tangents. Like we'll sit there and we'll watch, you know, episodes of the Ruby Spears animated series, which is another great, almost forgotten Superman show. You know, I mean, it came out in '88. It only lasted 13 episodes, but it is so great. You got Bo Weaver doing the voice of Superman. He later went on to do the voice of Reed Richards on the Fantastic Four. We've done episodes of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. We tend to fixate on Superboy TV series, and we are also doing our own season 5 episodes. I don't know if any of your listeners have ever watched our channel. You can find us under Superboy Beyond on YouTube. We've done a lot of great season 5 episodes, introducing new characters. We also, you know, do spotlight episodes. Like we've been doing a spotlight on Metallo as he appeared in the show. You know, so it's a great channel. You guys really should peruse it. And you know, we would love any comments you can give us.
All right, everyone. So make sure you check out Superboy Beyond. Thank you, Chris. My thanks once again to Nick Farina for joining me to discuss the Superman 2025 costume. Folks, we are off next week for the Memorial Day holiday. We will be back in 2 weeks with the next installment of a Superboy Fan Journey. In the meantime, while we're off next week, I hope you will check out another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, our episode-by-episode rewatch of the George Reeves Superman television series. A lot of the folks you've heard on Digging for Kryptonite have been popping up as guests over there, including Ed Gross, Zach Moore, Rob O'Connor, Dan Greenfield, and Rich Roney. And we've also had special guests like Adventures of Superman historian and Uber fan Jim Nolt, as well as legendary Superman comics editor from the Triangle era, Mike Carlin, who joined me for an episode as well. So while Digging for Kryptonite is off next week, I hope that you will queue up another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. I also want to remind everyone that we have a banger of an episode of Beyond Metropolis Touring the DCU, which is my Patreon exclusive spinoff podcast. It's available now. It features Zach Moore from Always Hold On to Smallville. And we talked about the unaired 2006 Aquaman pilot starring Justin Hartley from the producers and showrunners of Smallville. We had a wonderful conversation. If you are a fan of Smallville or of these lost unaired DC pilots and projects, I really think you will enjoy it. The link is in the show notes. You can listen by joining the DC Tourist tier of my Patreon, or you can just purchase the episode individually in my digital store. Either way, I hope you will enjoy it, and I very much appreciate the support of all of our patrons. Okay, once again, Digging for Kryptonite will be back in 2 weeks. Don't miss it. Until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Another Exciting Episode in the Adventures of Superman, an episode-by-episode breakdown of the classic George Reeves television show, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.